All right. Thank you guys for attending tonight. We are happy to kick off this webinar for limited partners, syndicators, and hope you guys learn a lot tonight. We're going to go ahead and dive right in. And as we go through this tonight, feel free to pull up in the chat, pop in questions as you think of them. We'll try to answer them along the way, and certainly we'll pause at the end and have time for Q&A as well. So stick with us through the end. We're gonna power through a whole lot of information, and so we're gonna kind of work through, set the stage, and then dive into some examples for you guys. So off we go. I'm gonna start off with just a thought. I love sharing this quote because it helps us think about what prompts us to change the way we think about our money and change the way we think about things we do when we have ideas and things we want to change in our real estate investment strategies, in our own personal financial life, even generally speaking. But I love this quote. He says, people change in 4 different seasons. He says, when they hurt enough that they have to, and when they see enough that they're inspired to, and when they learn enough that they want to, or when they receive enough that they're able to. So I've just always thought that was a really neat quote, and just kind of gets my mind, every time I see it, just gets my mind thinking about like what prompts me to change and make necessary changes in my life. Another thing I hear all the time is, yeah, I'm going to get around to it. I need to do that one day, And so I always say, I love this. I heard someone say one time, one day or day one, which one's it going to be? Let's get around to it. So if you see something tonight that speaks to you about just needing to act, and yeah, I need to do that someday, I encourage you to just act on it. Call us. Let's help you figure it out, talk through it, and get started. I'm going to kick this over to Ryan, let him introduce himself, and then we'll launch into it.
Yeah, well, it's good to be with you guys, and excited to share this with you. My name is Ryan Haley. I am a certified financial planner, an investment advisor, and I've got, a lot of educational background, but I would say the most important thing about me for the purpose of this presentation and anything I do is that first and foremost, I am personally a real estate investor, a business owner, and probably most importantly, somebody who uses the strategies we're talking about, both in my personal life and for my businesses, my real estate investments, all kinds of different things. So it's one thing to know about it and book knowledge, or even to help clients who are doing something. It's another thing entirely to do something on your own. Just to give you a little bit more background, I was in the military for a little over 10 years. I was a helicopter pilot. I'm an Afghanistan combat veteran. But I got out of the military in 2014 and kind of went to the radical opposite end of the spectrum, became a realtor, self-employed, learned what that world looked like, learned a lot about real estate, but realized that it was more for me about managing the finances than the selling the properties themselves. But eventually over time, I became a full-time investor and used the infinite banking concept, which we'll obviously go more into. And then eventually I ended up, getting my own policy using this, and became so just convicted by the power of this strategy and the whole way that it changes your thinking. I think infinite banking and real estate investment are probably responsible for more transformational thinking and results in my financial journey than anything else. So, I've got a lot of other things I could go into, but I think the important thing is a lot of extensive, backgrounds, education, licenses, certifications, etc. But most importantly, coupling that with real world experience in everything we're going to talk about tonight. I'll be sharing some personal examples from my own life, as well as some client testimonials, as will Jason. But I think that'll I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, myself, Jason Powers here, and I love what I do. I love teaching people about infinite banking, and I was practicing it like Ryan. I was practicing it before I got into it as a career, and I was doing real estate investing, and as I learned about IBC, I was like, man, everybody needs to know about this. And part of when I needed a career shift years ago, that's what prompted me to first make one of my priorities was like teaching real estate investors how to use IBC. So I hope you guys glean from this tonight. I got into it back in 2008, real estate investing, and started off the wholesaling, worked up to fix and flips, did the buy and hold thing, still doing that. Ended up buying a 170 acre former camping and recreation area several years ago. that have been shut down, start rebuilding that up. I've since, seller financed that off to new people. And so I've had my fair share and range of real estate investing, and I've had fun just utilizing infinite banking throughout the whole process. So we're going to show you some different case studies tonight, and certainly from a syndication perspective as well. And hopefully you guys will learn from that. We have to think about what we do. We have this need for generational thinking. And I think we've lost that as we talk finances all the time. We kind of lose the sight of intergenerational thinking. So I think there's a need for generational thinking, and that we need to get back to. There's also a need for this life insurance, this downside protection that we don't talk about enough. It's a boring topic. It's not a topic we need to talk about. And I think it's important. I think it's more important than people realize. I joke. I say, people spend more time picking what color underwear they want to buy than they do what they want to do and how they want to protect their family. It's just, so life insurance is important. We're going to kind of touch on that tonight a little bit, but there's also a need for this disability income protection in life. What happens if we can't work all of a sudden? Do we have that protected? Do we have our income protected? What happens to our family? But more importantly, above and beyond all of this, I think there's a need for controlling the banking function in our lives. What would life be like if we had control of the banking function rather than constantly giving control to someone else, to banks, the banking system? Before we do that, a disclaimer we got to give, it's not intended as legal or tax advice. Do seek your own professional advice in the end. We will give you the best information we know how, of course. We don't want to steer you wrong, but just know that. So, need for life insurance. I'm going to kick this over to Ryan. Right.
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, just like Jason went through some caveats, the primary purpose of life insurance is for death benefit protection. All other benefits are purely ancillary, but those other benefits are pretty significant. So that's what we're going to focus mainly on. But there is that important need for downside protection. And I think that sometimes gets overlooked, especially when you're taking risk, in other things. If you're into syndications, private placements, those kinds of things, then both for the general partners, which is another webinar we posted recently, and maybe you'd be able to get a hold of that at a different time. That's really important. But even for you as a limited partner, just if you're the breadwinner for the family, or you're making most of the investment decisions and stewarding the wealth, and something happens to you, it might leave the people that are depending on you high and dry. So that's pretty important. And Jason, you can move to the next slide, I think.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, so spinning from that, and we'll touch on this as we go through. We'll kind of bring things back in and out of the picture. But we have this need for controlling the banking function, as I touched on. Nelson Nash once said, if some authoritative power distributed all the money in the world equally among all the people in the world, within 10 years' time, 97% of all the money would be back under control of 3% of the people. Well, why is that? Well, it's because they understand money and how to get it to flow to and towards them instead of away from them. And that's kind of what we want to help you understand tonight. How are we constantly getting money to flow away from us? How do we get it to flow towards us? Even more so, even if we're good at our real estate investment strategies, we don't want to change your strategy for real estate investing. We want to help you see how changing the flow of the money can turbocharge your strategies as we go tonight. We've been talking about money a lot. Now, I love asking this question. When it comes to your money, what would you like to do with it? How much would you like to have? When do you want it? But more importantly, why? What are you trying to do in the end? So just kind of have that question lingering, as we go through this, and even beyond tonight, just in general in your real estate investments. Well, I want to make money. Well, why do you want to make money? Well, so I can retire happy. Well, that's great. What do you want to do when you retire? Why do you want to retire happy? What do you want to do when you retire? Well, I want to sit on the beach and sip Mai Tais the rest of my life. Well, that's great. If you want to do that, if that's your why, okay. So just think about that tonight as we go through it. Okay. Couple of human behaviors I want to talk about. First one, Parkinson's law. There's 3 parts to this. Work expands to meet the time envelope allowed. So what do I mean by that? Okay, if you've got a contractor and he's, let's say you've got an apartment building, you've got a contractor need to remodel a bathroom. He says it's going to take him a week. So you say, fine, take a week, do it. He does it, gets it done. And then you've got another one come up. You don't actually have anybody going in there for about a month. So he knows he has about a month. You say, okay, how much time do you need to do it? How long is he going to take to do it? It's going to take a month to do it, right? Just because work expands to meet the time envelope allowed. We have this propensity to do that in many areas in our life. We just expand it out, even though we could get things done a lot quicker. Second piece of that is a luxury once enjoyed becomes a necessity. So by that, we mean, I love the example. I was just talking to someone a couple weeks ago. Big blizzard here. We're here in Colorado. Big blizzard was going on, and they pushed the button on their car, remote start, to get it heat up. And she made the comment. She's like, "Man, I love this remote start thing. I will never get a car without remote start again." And this is the first thing I thought of, was that it's just luxury once enjoyed becomes a necessity, and it's so true. Like air conditioned cars, air conditioned houses, remote start. What else? So this luxuries that rise in our life, and all of a sudden we make them a necessity. Third part is expenses rise equal to income. As our income increases, we tend to expand our standard of living, and so our expenses become more. So the combination of these three is what we would call Parkinson's law. If you can overcome this, it's a struggle. It's what keeps people behind often. If you can't overcome this, so if you cannot overcome it, you're going to be in trouble. You'll be a slave to it, But if you can overcome it, if you can whip it into shape, as Nash says, you will win. Okay, so who's really in control of our money? We finance everything. What? Credit cards, mortgages, cars, everything. And then we invest our money into products we have no control over. But ultimately, who's in control of our money in general, right? The banks. So if we can learn to control our money, it's the most profitable thing we can do in our life. Okay, second behavior, Willie Sutton's law. I like this one. He was a famous bank robber, if you didn't know. He was captured one time, and a reporter was interviewing him. And basically they asked him, "Why do you continue to rob the banks? Like, you keep doing it and you keep getting caught." And he said, "Well, that's where they keep the money." And so this kind of informal, law called Willie Sutton's law came up, and basically it says wherever wealth is accumulated, someone will try to steal it. Okay. And it's so true. And who's the biggest thief in our country today? Let's not get political about it, but we are constantly getting our money taken from us. That's not theirs. Three types of people. So there are. I'm going to finance a car. I'm going to pay it off over time, get back to zero. I'm going to finance another car, pay it off over time, get back to zero. And I'll do this throughout my entire life. So you keep resetting at zero. The saver does the opposite. It says, "Hey, I don't want to go into debt over this. So I'm going to save up for it. And then I'm going to buy that car." So they build up, and then they buy the car, go back to zero, build up again, go back to zero. So you're constantly resetting. What we want to show you tonight is how to become what we call the wealth creator, where you create this financial velocity that can literally last for generations. How do we do that? Enter the infinite banking concept. Nelson Nash came out with this book back in 2000. If you haven't read it, I suggest you read it. It's a 92-page book. It is kind of the source, if you will. It is where infinite banking came out of. Nelson Nash really put words to it. And I keep it on my shelf here. You can get it. We'll give you a link at the end. You can get a copy of it. You can go straight to their website and get it as well. But it's a great read. Everybody should be reading this book. Okay, what is IBC? What it's not is some financial hack, but what it is about taking control of the banking function in your life. Okay, it's the best place to warehouse your wealth. It's got guarantees, safety, access to your money now, allows you to control that banking function. And we're going to break this down as we go through the night. Okay, so 5 general rules of IBC. Keep these in mind as we go through the night, and it'll start making sense. Take the long view. I love real estate investors. We are a conundrum because we are some very patient people and have the ability to build up properties, build up passive income, because we're thinking long range. We're taking the long view. How do we build this up to have passive income, all into retirement? But on the other side, we're some of the most impatient people that I know. We have to, we want that deal done now, done yesterday. We want that money coming in now, one coming in yesterday. And so there's this kind of conundrum thought process going on that we constantly wrestle with. So with IBC, take the long view. This is not a get rich quick scheme. This is not a get rich quick ploy that you're going to activate and all of a sudden have a bunch of mystery money that showed up all of a sudden. So this is something that is consistent, reliable, guaranteed growth, and will benefit you throughout your entire life. Okay. Don't be afraid to capitalize. Just means, hey, once you get it, your next question is like, well, how much more can I put in there, to the system? Because it's benefiting me so much. The third one, don't steal the peas. That's a reference from the book. It just means be an honest banker. You would not steal from a lender. So when you become the bank, don't steal from yourself. Always have a way to pay yourself back at some point. Don't do business with banks. If you can be the bank, and rethink your thinking. What we show you on IBC, you really have to pivot your thought process away from traditional financial advice, especially some of today's financial gurus out there giving you just some advice that's not great for getting ahead. Okay. So what is it? It is the vehicle through which we show people how to do this is properly structured dividend paying whole life insurance from a mutual carrier. Now that's a mouthful, but we're intentional about it because it is specific. It is not just go get a whole life insurance policy. It is not a whole life insurance product that certain financial gurus rail against on their social media platforms and their podcasts and stuff. There are some very public ones out there and they rail against whole life. This is structured different. It is largely misrepresented, in my opinion, on how they explain it. And it's not fair to people because they're not getting the full picture and what they can do with this. And then those gurus tell you to go buy term insurance, and then they happen to have a company that they work with, that sells that product. It's just not fair. People are getting cheated out of opportunity. Properly structured. These policies we show you are properly structured. They're designed a specific way to maximize cash value growth and access early on and throughout your entire life. Dividend paying from a mutual carrier means there are two types of insurance companies. Okay, they're stock-owned companies. Where its benefits, it's what do you say? It's focus. It's idea for profit is for the stockholders. And then there's mutual carriers. As a policyholder, you're basically one of the owners of the company, thus entitled to the profits which come in the form of dividends. Okay, so that's why we say dividend paying from a mutual carrier. Tonight, for tonight's conversation and the conversation of infinite banking, we are talking about whole life insurance. We're not talking about term. We're not talking about UL products and stuff tonight. We're talking about whole life insurance. There's a place for those other products, but not in tonight's conversation. So whole life, what is it? Why whole life? Well, it's been around for a really long time. Just how you design them has modified over the years. It's been around since the 1700s. I love the fact that it was originally called the Corporation for Relief of Poor and Distressed Widows and Children of Presbyterian Ministers. No joke. Say that 10 times fast, Ryan. So it actually started because ministers were being supported by the church throughout their life and their families. And then when that person would pass away, the family was no longer supported, thus left destitute. And so they needed something to help continue supporting the families, even though this person had gone. And so that's how whole life insurance got started. Who carries whole life insurance? Cash value whole life insurance. Banks. They carry billions of dollars in cash value whole life insurance. You can find their reports online. It is a tier 1 asset for them. Some of these banks on the screen own more in cash value whole life insurance than they do in real estate. And that's a very large number when you think about it. And that's fascinating. And it makes you wonder, what do they know? What are they up to? Why aren't they buying CDs like they sell? How come they're not just buying, these kinds of things? Like why aren't they doing what they're selling? Fortune 500 companies, these companies, man, they understand it, they get it, they got it. Owners of these companies. It's so fun as you start digging around and seeing who historically has been utilizing whole life insurance policies. Fun story on Walt Disney. Couldn't get enough of a loan to finish building a theme park based on a mouse out in California. And so he utilized the cash value from one of his policies and finished paying for that park. Well, Disney, maybe Mickey wouldn't even be here if he didn't have a whole life policy. I don't know. Ray Kroc, when he bought out the McDonald brothers, he used 2 different policies to pay for some key employees, and then he also started a marketing campaign on his newest, latest, and greatest mascot, which was a clown, Mr. Ronald McDonald. So I say maybe Ronald wouldn't be here if he didn't have whole life insurance. Who knows? Who knows? Okay, certain dignitaries, they know about it. They knew about it. Okay, so as you dig into this, you start finding stories. Interesting article came out on President Biden a while back when he had to disclose his finances, talked about how he owns 0 investment products and 6 whole life policies. And that was a head scratcher for me. Oh, well, wait a minute. What does he know? What's he up to? We don't know what he's doing with it, but it's got to be a reason. No investment products and 6 whole life policies. Okay. So with that, we say there's this wealth of common knowledge that we know, but there's this whole wide world of uncommon knowledge out there that's just not taught in general public circles. And infinite banking is one of them. And that's what we want to teach people. Is just what's this uncommon knowledge out there and how can it benefit us? So I'm going to break down, Ryan, feel free to chime in here as we kind of dig through this. We're going to hit this at a high level, and then we're going to kick it over to Ryan. He's going to take us a little bit deeper and then take us into some case studies from there. But some of the benefits, advantages, and the whys of IBC, we need to think about changing the flow of our money. I always tell people, don't rule yourself out as we talk through this, because part of our job is to help you think outside the box with your own situation. Every situation is unique. And so you may not be thinking of, oh, well, I couldn't do something like this because ... I don't have this much extra money or whatever. And sometimes, Ryan and I can sit and look at your situation and go, well, actually, we're changing the flow if we change the flow of the money, it opens up a bunch of opportunity for you. And we'll show you that. Okay. So I think, in my opinion, the single greatest benefit is the fact that your cash value inside of your policy, which we'll talk about, grows uninterrupted throughout your entire life, even while you're using it. What do I mean by that? I mean, if I have a pool of money in a savings account, let's call it $100,000 in a savings account, and it's a high yield savings account, 5%. Are those days gone already? 5% high yield savings account, and I'm going to take 50,000 out and use it for something. It's only growing at 5% on what I left in there. So you've interrupted the growth. In cash value growth inside of your policy, if I had $100,000 in cash value sitting there and I borrow 50,000 out, it's growing as if that money never left. Okay, and we're going to bring that home in a couple of different examples tonight.
Well, I would actually just clarify that, Jason. It's not growing as if it never left. It's growing because it actually never left.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, it addresses a lot of lost opportunity cost issues, income tax-free growth, the way we help structure those. It is income tax-free growth. You have guarantees. It is the vehicle through which you can use now throughout your entire life. You can even use it to supplement retirement later. Income tax-free when done right, and we'll show you that. It's safe from investment booms and busts. This is not an investment product. This is not about invest your money into something, rely on the markets. This is an asset. So it's contractually guaranteed to do certain things for you. So it's unaffiliated with markets. When the markets crashed, policies were fine. They didn't move. They were fine. When you borrow against the policies, they're not tied to your credit. You, me, and the carrier know about it. That's it. Unstructured loans. How would you like to dictate your own loan terms? I would love it. I do love it. to take a loan and then you decide, how often am I going to pay it back? How am I going to pay? How much am I going to pay back? How long am I going to take? How's it going to work? Okay, the multitasking dollar. It's doing multiple things at once, which we've alluded to. It's growing because it never left. And you've got the money out doing different things for you, making you money or saving you money. And then, of course, you've got the generational wealth transfer. This is life insurance that we are talking about. And so, and we're not going to have time tonight, but when we talk about it, give me a call. We'll talk through it more. As we talk through this, the generational wealth transfer is a huge thing too, for families, and how to set this up to last multiple generations and beyond that even.
Absolutely. So hopefully you guys can see my screen here. Jason just went through a lot of really good points, and we're kind of saying many things, in a different way, but kind of just picking that up here. We talked about earlier the downside risk protection element that most people are familiar with when it comes to life insurance or insurance of any kind. But what we really are going to focus on again for this presentation and for the concept and strategy that we have used personally and help our clients use as real estate investors, business owners, et cetera, are the upside benefits with cash value policies. And that's an important thing because with term, there is no cash value. It's pure downside protection, just like property and casualty or anything else. With whole life insurance, there's a cash value that grows. That's the part that grows the wealth exponentially over time. And so, again, in addition to the death benefit, which of course we still get that, and it's going to grow, very significantly over time. But we've got this additional return component, which is that growth of that cash value. As Jason mentioned earlier, the uninterrupted compounding is what's really key about this. Because if you have, let's just say, like we're talking about, again, a 5% money market account right now, that's a lot better than we've gotten for a lot of, for many years. Historically, it's actually not all that impressive, but compared to recent past, it's pretty impressive. The problem is, as Jason mentioned, if you want to access that money, what happens? You draw it down. If you had $100,000 earning 5% in the money market account and you want to use 50,000 of it, well, now you only have 50,000 left that's growing at 5%, and the other 50,000 is whatever you used it for. Even if it's for an investment, it's not still earning 5% in the money market account. So that's the real key here, is the cash value growth for whole life specifically, as opposed to universal life or investment products with downside risk. There's this guaranteed safety, predictability, this guaranteed return component. And when you're using it to deploy capital out of the policy into real estate or other investments or business opportunities, you've got this additional level of diversification. It's not correlated to the real estate market, the stock market, or anything else. It's just a guaranteed steady eddy return. It's not a spectacular percentage, but over time, when you put a lot of capital into that and it's growing uninterrupted, extremely tax advantaged for very long periods of time, that does add up very significantly over time. Then tax efficiency is another huge deal. In addition to real estate, or I would say maybe even more so than real estate, and I couldn't believe this at first when I started learning about this concept when I was already familiar with real estate. The tax deferred growth, if we set this up, as Jason mentioned, it's actually, you're never going to get taxed on it as long as we structure the policy the right way. And that's why it's important to work with an expert and a professional who has depth of expertise in this kind of niche way of setting this stuff up. But then you've also got, when you borrow against your policy, you are paying interest, just like a HELOC, a home equity line of credit, on a property that you're using to be able to put that same dollar in multiple places at the same time. If it's used for a bona fide, business or investment purpose, then you're going to get that tax deductible interest, which is a really significant, especially for those in higher tax brackets, and that adds up over time as well. So, just to recap, the insurance component of this, a traditional versus an IBC policy. Traditional policy, most people are understandably trying to minimize their premiums, the amount that they have to pay, and maximize their death benefit. With an IBC policy, we're turning that on its head. It's the exact opposite. We're trying to maximize the premiums, or the amount of money we're capitalizing into our banking system, if you will, and minimize the death benefit. Why are we trying to minimize the death benefit? Because the higher the death benefit, basically there's going to be more cost of insurance and expenses. And so by minimizing the death benefit at a given premium level, we're optimizing the cash value that's initially available, as well as the rate of growth of that cash value over time. So you kind of, again, we talked earlier about uncommon thinking, uncommon knowledge, really rethinking your thinking. This is like literally turning the traditional policy on its head. So we're going to, I think a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I'm going to get into an actual policy illustration here. And before I do that, Jason, I just want to say if you have any, follow-up thoughts or, framing before we go into like really digging into these numbers here.
No, I think it's great. I'm excited to see some numbers.
So with that said, when we're looking at these numbers, this is just a hypothetical, profile or illustration. It's assuming a male, age 40, with a good health rating, but not the best, preferred, non-tobacco, This is from a mutual company that we talked about that we work with a lot. We work with a number of companies, but we just chose this one as an example. And this number, this might seem, kind of intimidating for some people who are watching this. $100,000 is our assumed annual premium for 10 years. I do that because it's just a nice round, easy number. I usually use either 10,000 or 100,000, or in some cases, $1 million if we're talking about general partners and big, scale syndication projects. But the key is don't get hung around the actual dollar amount. It's the concept and the ratios. They scale proportionately. So whether it's 10,000, 100,000, or $1 million, within reason, you can move the decimal place left or right, but these numbers are generally going to scale. So in this case, again, we're assuming starting at age 40, you're putting $100,000 in. That's the annual outlay here. You're going to do that for 10 years. And even though you could continue paying, just to show you the power of how you can max fund these really early and then never pay anything again, you're not going to pay anything after year 10. So basically, 100,000 for 10 years is $1 million total. And you see the cumulative outlay here. If you're tracking with this illustration here, hopefully that's making sense. 100,000 the first year plus 100,000 the second year. At that point, you put in 200,000, so on and so forth till you get to $1 million. Now, this is structured in a specific way. And again, depending on all the variables in any given scenario, we can change these. But I think this is fairly representative that year one, you're going to have immediately available $78,000 worth of cash value in this case. And you can usually borrow about 95% or so of that. So you'll probably have access to about 75,000 or so roughly right off the bat, day one, right? So you are going to be slightly negative, but that's not bad.
I would jump in, Ryan, and just kind of point out, Ryan and I were talking just before we started this webinar about this fact and on how, just like he alluded to a second ago about don't get caught up on the number of zeros on the illustration, but and furthermore, don't get too caught up on the as we would put it, loss of access that first year. Like Ryan's talking about, hey, you pull 75-ish out a first year. So we can move, it's because everybody's situation is so unique. We can move that slider back and forth a little bit. And if you need a tiny bit more, there's ways to do that. If you don't need as much now and more growth later, there's ways to do that. And like Ryan has stated already, this is just a general illustration and a generalization, and we would customize something for you in your situation.
Right, exactly. And in this case, again, given the specifics of the variables that we input as our starting parameters, you're starting off with a death benefit of over $2 million. And you can see that every year that death benefit is going up. Now, you will notice at one point it drops down. At the end of year 10, it drops down below where it was the year before. And that's because in this case, we had assumed in this example that we're doing what's called a reduced paid up, or RPU, which means that you're no longer paying any premiums ever again. Therefore, that you lower the death benefit, and that's actually going to, again, increase the rate of return of the cash value that's growing over time. And so we'll get into those annual, year by year numbers in a second. But I just want to show you guys here, even though if you're looking at, rate of return, again, this is not a rate of return conversation. This is a long-term compound growth conversation. But at less than 4%, you've already almost doubled your money from $1 million that you put into 1.8 million, slightly more of cash value in year 20. By that point, your death benefit is almost $3.6 million. Now, one thing I should mention about this too is that the cash surrender value, sometimes people get confused on this. The way to think about this is the cash surrender value is that portion of the death benefit that is available to you for any reason at any time. So it's not like you get the cash value and the death benefit, but this death benefit, this 3.6 million or so of death benefit, about half of that is available to use at any time. If you use it, whether you withdraw or borrow, and we'll go into why we recommend that you borrow instead of withdraw in a second, that will just be subtracted from the death benefit that gets paid out to your beneficiaries on a net basis. And we'll go into more of that in a second. But you'll see that these policies are actuarially designed by age 121, where this cash value equals the death benefit exactly. And that's because the insurance company knows this is a permanent product. There's a 100% chance that you're going to die at some point in your life, and they need to take those premiums that you're paying and investing them in some rate of return to guarantee that they can pay that death benefit, not if, but when eventually that is required. So that's kind of how this works. But the big thing I want you to see is that, you are slightly behind those first 6 years, but your cumulative break even by year 7 could be more or less depending on the dividend crediting. But right now, this is pretty conservative and I think representative at a 5% dividend crediting scale. And again, over time is where the magic really happens. By the time this person is age 65, they put in $1 million of premiums. They've got over $2.3 million of cash value, and they got a very, very safe, very tax efficient 4% return. By the time they're 95, this is 55 years into the policy, that $1 million, and which they have not put in a single penny for the last 45 years, that $1 million they put in is now grown to over $8.5 million. And they've got that 9.3 million or so death benefit. And so, we're just going to assume that they live to age 95 for the purpose of this, but that is, pretty impressive. But what gets really interesting is when you look at every year on an annual basis, how much you're getting in passive income. So again, you're going to be slightly behind these first several years. Not bad, but a little bit, right? So that first year, you're putting in 100,000, you've got 78,000 in cash value. Second year, you put in 100,000, and that year, but just by itself, your cash value went up by almost 96,000. And you can see here the cumulative from the previous slide is about 174. And you see that every year, the amount of the cash value increase in relation to the annual premium that you have put in is going up more and more as that real compounding starts to happen inside the policy, to where in that last year you put in $100,000. In that single year alone, your cash value increased by almost $136,000. And at that point, you have over $1.1 million of cash value in the policy. But here's where it's really interesting. Again, we talked about that RPU, that reduced paid up, assuming in this case that you make an irrevocable decision that you're not going to put anything into the policy again. Look at this, never putting anything else again. In year 11, by the age of 51 in this example, you've got over $56,000 of tax-free guaranteed, or at least a portion of this is guaranteed. Part of it is very safe, but not guaranteed. But again, at 5%, we're, I think, on the conservative side of what's not guaranteed. And you see that every single year, this just keeps going up and up and up to where by the time this person is, before they're even at what is considered a full retirement age of what used to be 65, now 67, over $100,000 a year is being spit off in tax-free passive income without you having to put a single dime into this thing. And by the time they're 95, that's all up closer almost to $300,000. So I'm going to break this down even further and show you, because what's not shown on here are the tax benefits of what tax-free looks like. And if anybody who's an accredited investor, you're probably at a high tax bracket, probably you're very tax sensitive, and you know that that's really important. So I'm going to break this down even further with the spreadsheet, just breaking these numbers down. But before I do that, Jason, again, any thoughts, comments, or framing that you think would be appropriate?
No. The only thing I would add is as we talk through these, like the growth inside of the policy, that's just the growth inside the policy. And now you're going to take this cash value and put it outside and make you money above and beyond that. So it's growing inside the policy. First, you're going to take it out and make you money. Okay. So it's not just, I got to leave it in here to grow. That's changing the way we think. Okay.
Exactly.
We're going to take that money out and make you money.
That's exactly
so
right. 2 places at once. Yep. And we're going to get to that in a second about how powerful when you combine all these things are. I'm just trying to break it down one step at a time. But if you go back to looking at this annual cash value increase and what that looks like, I'm going to switch over to a spreadsheet that I put together. It's showing the same thing, but I'm breaking down the tax benefits. And hopefully, is that big enough that you guys can see this on here? The main thing I want you to see is this return on premium and tax adjustments on the right side. But what I did here was, in most investment vehicles, unless it's in a Roth, this would be similar, roughly analogous to a Roth IRA, in that you're not getting a tax deduction for putting the premium in, but you're not going to get taxed on taking anything out. Anytime if it did not have the significant tax benefits of life insurance, by year 7, you would have gains above your basis, which would be taxable. And so in that year alone, you have gains. You put in $100,000 in this case. your cash value increased by about $120,000, which means that this 19,442 is the amount above what you put in that would normally be taxed, right? So again, it's tax-free here, but if you're in the 35, this tax bracket here, I'm going to just highlight this real quick for you guys to see that, that 35% is pretty significant, right? I mean, if you're even in a state like Colorado where state tax is pretty reasonable, it's not that much between your top marginal federal, state, local self-employment, especially if you're a business owner, that adds up a lot. 35% is probably pretty conservative if you're talking about your top marginal rate, but let's just use 35% as an example. Not about 19,000 tax-free would be equivalent to about $30,000 of taxable gains at the 35% bracket. And I'm going to keep going, but I want to make sure that I stop for a second in case that's not 100% clear. So Jason, is what I'm saying tracking so far? Is that making sense, or you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think so. And for those of you listening, by all means, feel free to pop questions in the chat along the way too, if you need us to reiterate something.
Yeah. So again, just going back to what's happening on an annual basis here. So that was year 7. Year 8, you're putting $100,000 in. As always, your cash value increased by $124,355, meaning you had a return on premium, if you will, because I'm not going to say return on investment, but you had a return on premium of about $24,000, which would be about a 24% return. But again, that's a 24% return tax-free. If you're in the 35% bracket, that 24,000 is more like 37,000 if it were in a taxable account, which is more like a 37% return on that one annual premium, and so on and so forth until year 10. You put in 100,000 in that last year of paying premiums, your cash value goes up by almost 136,000. Your return on premium was 36,000 or 36%. And again, tax equivalent at the 35% bracket, that would be closer to 55,000 or 55%. Not bad for an annual return for an extremely safe, conservative vehicle with contractual guarantees. And then again, every year after that, I talked about how you start getting into, the 6 figures when you're, in this example, age 64 or 24 years into the policy, you've got over $103,000 of tax-free gains. Well, again, at the 35% rate, that's closer to $160,000. And by the ripe old age of 95 here, which is where we're assuming this person's going to pass on to the next generation and pay out that death benefit, that $278,000, which is pretty impressive by itself. Again, at the 35% bracket, that's tax equivalent to $428,000 in that single year. So sometimes it's not just what you see on the illustration, it's what you don't see on the illustration or the numbers directly, which in this case was those tax adjustments. So hopefully that's making sense for anybody who's in higher tax brackets. That should be a pretty big deal. The more that I do this, both as an insurance agent as well as a financial planner and investment advisor, the more I realize that these policies are really, for me and a lot of my clients, a silver bullet against taxes, even assuming the same rate of taxes right now. And I think most people would agree taxes are going up in the future. Now, again, this is assuming that this is constructed very specifically in conformance to IRS criteria that are really important, that anybody who does this full-time for a living should know about. But I do want to emphasize that this has a number of important assumptions as far as that goes. But that's just the policy itself. Now, if we're going back to, the illustration, or just kind of the benefits of these, how we're using these policies in the larger picture strategy, then it's not just the illustration, it's, the way that we access this, the strategy and the long-term planning around how we use these policies. And that's really, really important to understand that we're going to be primarily borrowing against the policy as opposed to, withdrawing the money for all the reasons we talked about before. And so for that reason, the first thing I'm going to talk about is when it comes to these upside benefits of these policies, it's really, really, this might be the single most important thing to learn at the policy level that a lot of people don't explain, is that you're earning compound interest, paying simple interest when you borrow against the policy. That is super, super important to understand. That's a significant advantage, even if you're earning the same or even a lower rate, as I'll show you in a minute. The difference of earning compound and paying simple is massive over decades. And so that's really, really important. That's probably the most important thing to understand about the policy itself. The other advantage is that sometimes, depending on the situation, you might also have what's called a positive arbitrage, where you're earning a higher rate and paying a lower rate. So for instance, if you're earning 5% and paying 4%, I saw my interest rate at one point when interest rates got really low was as low as 3% at one point. And that can really make a big difference. So that may or may not happen, but you don't necessarily need it as long as you're earning compound paying simple. But you add on top of that, you might be getting a positive arbitrage, profiting from the spread of earning a higher rate and paying a lower one. Then again, we talked about, and I broke down in that previous Excel spreadsheet, the tax efficiency, that you're not taxed on the growth if it's set up the right way, but yet the interest that you're paying, if it's for a qualified business or investment activity, is tax deductible. That's a huge deal. And then the biggest thing that I would say for real estate investors in particular, or people who are used to getting a high return on their capital, is that these are multitasking dollars. And from an overarching standpoint, not just the policy itself, but from a large picture, comprehensive planning and strategy standpoint, that's the most important thing. I don't know, Jason, if you get this a lot, people say, okay, you showed me some pretty cool things up to this point. You got some new wrinkles in my brain, but why would I settle for 4 or 5% long-term with all these benefits you just talked about when I can get 15, 20, 25, 30% plus IRR in my real estate? Emphatically, we are not saying to do that. We're saying do both at the same time. And that's the key, is that when you put the money into the policy, borrow against it, just like you would a HELOC with a property, then you can get your money working in two places at the same time. And in this example that we'll go through, real estate as well as the policy itself. The policy is not the investment, but the policy funds and protects the investment. In some cases, if you've got, for general partners or syndicators, key man insurance, or for you as the limited partner, you've got that money going into the policy, earning a return. You're at the same time accessing the capital, putting into real estate, that's earning a return. And then you've got that death benefit. Another thing we haven't even talked about, and I'm not going to go into right now too much, is accelerated living benefits. If you get a critical, chronic, or long-term terminal illness, that can be a huge help. Jason, any thoughts before I move on?
No, it was great.
Excuse me. Okay, so to illustrate how important each one of these four things are, I broke down things into another spreadsheet that has some graphs built in, just because I really want to drive this home. And what I'm about to show you is not a policy example. It's not a real estate example. It's just a hypothetical example of $100,000 being invested one time and earning compound versus simple interest. So I'm going to share that screen now. And I've got some different tabs. This first one here, just to illustrate this point, I told you it's not so much important that you earn a higher rate than what you're paying. It just matters that you're earning compound and paying simple. And in this case, you've got an example where you're earning 5% compound, paying 5% simple. So you've got a 0% spread. And obviously that first year, you're going to break even. You're going to earn $5,000 in interest. You're going to pay $5,000, assuming that they're both 5%, right? So no difference, better or worse off than where you started. But starting in successive years, you start seeing that compound interest is really important, because 5% of 100,000 is 5,000. When you add that 5,000 to the 100,000 you started with, now you're earning 5% on 105,000, which is 5,250, while you're still paying that simple 5% loan balance, assuming you borrowed 100%, which again, this isn't a directly policy example of real estate, but you're slightly ahead that next year at $250. Then you add that 5,250 on top of the 5,000. Now you're earning 5% on $110,250, still paying 5% on the 100,000. Now you got a slightly higher positive arbitrage this year of $513. So you can see how this goes over certain periods of time. By year 10, just because of the difference of earning compound versus paying simple, you're now earning 5% on 155,000, still paying 5% on 100,000, assuming you have not paid down the loan at all. you're already almost $13,000 better off than you would have been if you were earning simple and paying simple, or earning compound and paying compound, right? By year 20, that's $252,000 that's growing uninterrupted compounding. And you can see so on and so forth. By the time on this graph, if you go out, and again, this is a long-term play, this purple line is how much you've actually made on top of, what the compound versus the simple interest adds up to. So by year 50, just again, earning 5%, paying 5% sounds like a zero spread. You can see it's anything but. You're almost $800,000 better off by the end of that 50-year period, even with no rate advantage whatsoever, right? So that's pretty important to understand. Then we just layer on top all these additional benefits. If you're getting 5% compound and it's tax-free, again, at the 35% bracket, that $5,250 or that $5,000, that you earned in year one is really closer to $7,700. And you can see that this is a significantly better advantage than it was previously, even though it was pretty good previously. Now, when you add the tax benefit of the untaxed growth compare and the compound earnings versus simple tax deductible interest, or sorry, not even non-deductible interest. This is just assuming you're not getting a deduction. You're almost $1.4 million better off after 50 years. Then when you further assume that the interest you're paying is tax deductible, well, $5,000, if you're in the 35% tax bracket, is really tax adjusted closer to $3,250. That puts it up even higher. And then lastly, when you're borrowing and investing in real estate or some other place, even with the relatively conservative 8% assumed external rate of return, this is where you add all this stuff together and the magic really adds up, that by the end of that 50-year period, you add all those things together. And hopefully if you're in real estate, 8%, between the cash flow and appreciation is not even including any tax benefits in the real estate, then you see the magic of how all these things come together. By the end of 50 years, you're over $6 million better off than you would have been otherwise. So I'm not going to pretend that that's going to be a realistic example for every single person. There's a lot of assumptions and hypotheticals in there, but I just wanted to bring up how important any one of those things are, but particularly the combination of all those things put together really, really adds up to a significant amount over time. So again, I know that's a lot, but I don't know if you have any thoughts to just kind of close that out before you go on, Jason, but that was mind-blowing to me when I took the time to put that together and understand it.
Yeah. And as Ryan pulls up his case study next, just to comment about the simple versus compound, it's such a fascinating, like if you like spreadsheets, these are great. You can build these out and put in your own numbers and figure out what's the difference, and I think it's such an important thing to understand as you start to do the math, on your own and start going, hey, even a good example is when you ask people, hey, if you have whatever $30,000, would you make more? Just to understand the compounding effect. Would you make more if you put it in a CD for 5 years at 4%? Or would you make more loaning it out on an amortized loan at 6%? Well, at a glance, people don't usually do the math. They go, well, 6% is more than 4. Duh. 6% then will make more. We said, well, let's do the math. And if you do the math on that particular example, you'll find out the 4% CD outpaces the 6% AM loan. And why is that? Because it's how it grows. CDs are compounding. The amortization schedule is you're paying interest on a lesser amount every year.
Yeah, you know what? That's a really good point, Jason. I want to play around with this just a little bit. I'm going to share this before I go to the case study. I just want to illustrate this. Let's use that exact same example. You're earning 4% versus, let's just say you're paying 6%, whether that's opportunity cost or a hard interest expense. Looks like you're losing money, right? How could you make money by earning 4% and paying 6%? Again, the key is simple versus compound. And look at that. In fact, that's actually the one with all the big ones. Let's look at just the simple, without any tax, adjustments in our favor or anything with real estate, just 4% versus 6% and nothing else. Look at that. Over 50 years, you're still over $300,000 better off, even though it looks like you're 50% worse off, right? You're paying twice as much or 50% more. 6% is 50% more than 4%. You got a spread of 2%. 200 basis point negative spread is usually pretty bad for long-term wealth compounding. But in this case, because of compound versus simple, it still works.
Yeah.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go into my personal example here of how I use IBC, and just kind of giving a fairly simple case study. This is my own personal case study. So this might bring it home a little bit more, but I'll just start off with, I was age 24. This was 2004. I had a standard health rating, which is not by any means the best. And I was starting off with the simple $200 a month payment. My dad set me up with the policy when I was about to go into flight school when I was in the military, and I'd probably be uninsurable otherwise. This was not designed for an infinite banking policy. It was not designed to be, optimized in this way. And if I'd known then what I know now, it would have been a lot better, but it still worked. It's just the power of consistency and just compounding over time. Like we talked about, this was a $200 a month straight out of my bank account, set it and forget it. I never even noticed it was gone. I was making pretty decent money in the Navy as an officer at that point. $250,000 death benefit, again, not at all optimally structured like what we're talking about here. Yet, it ended up being really important. And so fast forward 13 years, I'm looking at my first dedicated real estate investment acquisition. I had gotten burned in 2008 when I bought a single family, or actually it was a condo for myself. Took a while to recover from that, but when I was ready to get back in the game and really do it right this time, by this point, I was in Colorado. I was about to buy a fourplex, and I had about $40,000 of policy cash value, and that was important because to close this deal, I had a decent amount saved up in just cash in a checking account, which I would not recommend doing now, obviously knowing what we do now, but at the time I didn't have anything better to do with it. So I had about 65,000 in a checking account or savings account. It was earning next to nothing. And then I cashed out some other stuff in a low yield portion of my non-qualified brokerage account, but I still needed to come up with about $40,000 to close the deal because the seller needed to redeploy that capital into a much bigger project. The buyer's financing contingency was falling through. As you guys know, in real estate, sometimes that can make or break the deal. So I was able to come in with a quote unquote all cash offer because, again, like Jason mentioned earlier, if you're borrowing from your policy, nobody knows about it besides you and the insurance carrier. As far as anybody else in this deal is concerned, I got this policy loan from my policy, and that was just straight up cash. So I had about $40,000 of cash value, and I took a, again, tax-free policy loan because this was not a modified endowment contract. We set it up the right way, and it helped me close the deal. At this point, I have my money working for me in two places at the same time. I had it working for me in the policy, tax-free, compounding that whole thing, and I also now had it in the property. Property details, this was a fourplex in Columbus, Ohio. Purchase price of $125,000. Monthly rent was $2,800 over the 28-month 28-month hold. I averaged about $850 a month of cash flow. And 28 months later, I wasn't planning on it, but I was able to sell the property for $175,000. I netted an internal rate of return after fees and every single thing of 18.26%, which was pretty good, especially compared to the 0.15% I was earning in my savings account. In relative terms, to go from 0.15% to 18.26%, that's a relative increase of 12,000%. So greatly increased my rate of return on a relative basis. Net present value of about $55,000, and got a net 2.5-year total return between the cash flow and the appreciation after fees and everything of 44%. So that was pretty cool. And that would not have been possible for me to close that deal and get to understand all this stuff if it weren't for the cash value in that policy that I had almost forgotten about, from 13 years prior. Now, at this point, I liquidate the property. I've got $157,000 of net sales proceeds. It's earning literally 0% in a business checking account. This was early 2020, right before COVID happened, a very difficult investing environment. Where do I put my money? Well, I wanted to have it someplace, like Jason said, safe, liquid, available to me so that if there was an opportunity, I could easily capitalize. So what I was able to do was take the money from that property sale and do what's called a 1035 exchange into a much better, more optimally structured policy. Because I had mentioned to you previously that was not how this policy was set up initially. And just like a 1031 exchange, tax-free, like kind of property exchange in real estate, you can do the same thing with life insurance called 1035. And that had a $900,000 initial death benefit, long-term average return very conservatively between 4 to 5%. But the benefits and advantages are that idle cash that was just sitting 157,000 in a checking account earning 0% was now in the policy. It was compounding, it's waiting. I was able to eventually access it and, have some deals that were, good to do at the time, while I could be very safe and very able to sleep well at night, knowing that my money was safe in the policy at that time. I'm building equity in the policy now. I could wait for better real estate deals. So I don't have to try to feel as much of that kind of itchy trigger finger to redeploy that money, because man, it's only earning 0% in a checking account. I had liquidity, check in 2 to 5 business days. Again, I've got this diversification element of not having equity tied to real estate or the stock market, which actually can really help you in a downturn. And so in summary, using this infinite banking concept, my policy initially funded the real estate investment. At that point, I had money working in 2 places at once. Then eventually the real estate sale funded the policy. So you can see these things can be both and. It's, A feeds B and then B feeds A. You've got this virtuous wealth ecosystem and kind of virtuous cycle being, compounding on top of compounding over time. So what it all adds up to at the end of the day was accelerated wealth building, increased financial freedom, and a greater sense of passion, purpose, and impact, to where once I started seeing how this works so well, I'm now doing this full time, helping people to do this as well. So hopefully that kind of makes some sense for you guys, using a real life personal example. And I know Jason's got another one, so I'm going to pass it back to him. But Jason, any thoughts or comments from having just shared that?
Yeah, I think that's great. I think you just keep in mind as we move forward, we've got 2 more case studies. I'm going to show you one. Ryan's going to show you another one after that, and we are building up. We're kind of showing you a variety of these situations, just so you can see kind of the versatility of this and how it can work. So let's dive into the second one here, and this is based on an actual client of mine who is in the single family space. He was, when we met and he first learned about IBC, he was buying small rental properties in a college town in the Midwest. And what he would do, he had a day job, so he was just stockpiling the cash, the free cash flow from those as it would come in. And as he had enough accumulated, he would then go buy another property with it. And so that was the strategy. And by the time we talked, he had about 18 properties built up. And so it was working. And so he was just continuing to do it. So when we met, talked about IBC, again, we didn't want to change that strategy per se. We wanted to change the flow of the money. And by changing the flow of the money, what does that do for us? And so that was the question behind the strategy we built. What does changing the flow of the money do? Without having to come with all this extra money, outside money to figure out how to fund policies. How do we just change the flow of his existing money? And what does that do for us? Okay, so let's dive in. So in his case, we didn't need to do too much. So his very first policy, we were going to do $36K a year on that policy. And you can see in the red box, but $36K in year 1, he's got about 23 accessible, day 2, basically. So what we were going to do is fund the policy, and then as he had enough, he was going to put, he was buying these in this college town. He's buying them for 50 grand a pop. So that's awesome. He kind of dominated that market a little bit. And so as you think about this, again, like we talked about earlier, add a 0, take off a 0, whatever, functionally, it's going to be the same. Structurally, it's going to be the same. So in his case, we were going to do 36 a year for about 10 years. He was 49 at the time. And then we were going to reduce premiums down to a base on into retirement. And so we built out a spreadsheet just to show, hey, more spreadsheets. We were loving spreadsheets. But the spreadsheet just to show, what does that do for us? Okay. So breaking down here, and I'm going to see if I can get the pointer to work here. Breaking down here, gross cash values in this early column here. And then you've got annual premiums, the second, this middle column over here. Okay, so right away, we don't have enough. He wants to wait until he has 50 in there before he borrows and buys another property. He wants to pay cash for it. So right away, we just fund it the first year. And then by the second year, we've paid premiums, and now we can take out a loan for 50. So that's that arrow right smack in the middle of the screen there. So now he's going to borrow against that policy of 50,000. And then he's going to set himself up, be an honest banker, don't steal the peas. Remember, he's going to set himself up with a 20-year AM loan at 4%. That's $303 a month. He could pay it faster. We just wanted to run this out and say, hey, if we kept the interest real low and ran it real long, what does that do for us? Okay, because they're only $50,000 properties. So 4%, 20 years, 303 a month. He starts paying back via rents. He starts paying the policy loan back over a 20-year period. And then he's going to plan on paying premiums from original free cash flow. He's going to still be paying premiums. So let me back up here. So by year 3, you can see about in the middle there, we don't take another loan. We skip a year just to build it up a little bit better. And then let me skip to this one. You can see the year over here where this arrow is. This is year 4 now. So year 4, we've built up enough cash value, and he's going to take another $50,000 loan. He's going to set himself up with a second payment, same arrangement, a whole new payment with that property. So each property is going to pay its own loan back over time. But then something interesting happens. Between year 4 and 5, he's paying 36 in premiums, and he's paying the 606 a month now back. But now, without having to skip a year, he's got enough in there he can borrow against the policy and take another loan. So year 5, he takes another loan out and buys another property. You with me? Fast forward, year 6, pays 36 into policy. Cash value grew more than 50. He pulls 50 out again, sets himself up with a 4th property. Year 7 does it again. Same payments. You see that payment jumping $303 a month every year for each property he's buying. Okay, year 7, he does it. Year 8, he does it. And he just continues buying properties this way. So we ran this out about 10 years just to see what would happen if we just stopped buying properties. He's got enough in there. He could keep doing it. You can see on the far right column is his cumulative available cash value that particular month growing. So he's still paying premiums and he's paying the principal loans back. But we said, hey, year 11 onward, let's just see what it looks like. Let's stop buying properties and just let it grow. So that's what we did on this illustration. So, and then you can see we've dropped year 11. We've also dropped the premium. So now he's going from 36 a year to 12 a year in premiums because we've created enough growth momentum that first 10 years, we don't need to keep hyperfunding it like that. If he wants to start another policy at this point, now he's got additional free cash flow above and beyond. He's got 8 more properties now than he had. And so his cash flow is even more. And so he could take that free cash flow and the savings and premiums now and start a whole nother policy if he wanted to. And that's where you start setting up what we call your privatized family banking system, your system of policies over time. And that's just one strategy. As your cash flow increases, you have the ability to start other policies and replace the bank even more so. Okay, so let's fast forward a little bit. 16 years in, 17 years in, he's got 12,000 in premiums he's paying. The cash value that year grew 36,000. Plus, he's paying that 27 a month on all these properties on the right side. So his actual cash value increase, available cash value increase that 1 year was $52K, just that 1 year. And so that's again the power of compounding, what that can do over time, and how the policy, just 16 years in, he's putting 12,000 in premiums. The cash value alone is growing 36, and he can just keep stacking it. Plus, you see his cash value available on the far right. He's got 300,000 in there, up to 350,000 by the end of the year. It just keeps growing and growing and growing. And the sky's the limit. What do you want to do with it? He doesn't have to leave it in there. He can keep buying properties. He can buy bigger properties. and keep doing it. He wants to retire at some point. So by 67, he's got a net far right. He's got a net $500,000 sitting in there by this strategy. If he were to pay all the loans back, he'd have 662 in there.
Which he could probably,
but he's still
at that point though, right, Jason? Because this is assuming he has not liquidated any of these properties or borrowed against them with the HELOC,
yeah, that's
right? So he's got tons of equity in the properties and in the policy at the same time, which is kind of, this is like that fourth tab I shared where you've got all the compounding, the tax efficiencies in the policy. At the same time, you've got this compounding outside the policy, and then they interact, and two compounding systems then start compounding each other. That's where the real magic starts to happen.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, I mean, you've got your cash value growth, you've got your recovery of your loans that you've been taking, and you've got your equity growth, you've got your free cash for your rental income. So you've got all of this growth happening, all at once. And it's just a phenomenal vehicle once you harness it, once you get your head wrapped around it, and then all of a sudden you're doing, I got clients all the time that call or text or email, and they're like, hey, so I've got this idea, and they're constantly like, hey, now they're getting it. And now the wheels are turning. How else can we utilize this? Oh, I've got this opportunity. What would it look like? Forget real estate for a minute. Let me tell you about a client real quick, and then we'll get into Ryan's study. I'll stop share here. And I've got a situation. I had a client call me a week ago, 2 weeks ago, and she said, I've got some cash value built up. I have a student loan payment that's kicking in, but what would it look like if I just borrowed and from my policy paid off the student loan and then began paying my policy back at the same rate that they were going to make me pay? And so we ran a comparison. What would it look like if she just paid the student loan on her own? And what would it look like if she paid the policy back in that rate? And it turns out, and the math made sense, it turns out she was going to save quite a bit by doing a policy loan herself. And so it was just a completely unrelated, just to show you kind of how versatile you can get with it. It doesn't have to be real estate. It can be a car loan. It can be a student loan. It can be car loan and a student loan and real estate and credit card debt. And, it can be all of this at once if you've got enough in there, right? And be doing multiple things at once. Makes sense. So the sky's the limit, as I said.
Because you can think of if you're paying down debt, you can think of the rate of return, quote unquote, if you will, being equal to the rate that you're paying down on the debt. So if you've got 20% credit card debt, right, then by paying down that credit card, you're essentially getting a guaranteed rate of return of 20%, again, which is not taxable, right? So I like those debt repatriation strategies like you just described, because you've got a guaranteed rate of return you're going to get. It could be very high if you're paying down high interest, credit card or student loan debt or whatever the case is. If you got, real estate bridge loans even that are, with rate caps expiring or whatever the case is. And again, the tax efficiency at multiple levels. I love your real estate example, Jason, where you're compounding all this wealth, but very, very little, if any of that would have been taxed, because you're getting the tax deduction on the interest offsetting the income from the rentals. Of course, the appreciation in the properties is never taxed unless and until you sell. And the same thing with the policy. So you've got this amazing acceleration of multiple wealth ecosystems with incredible tax efficiency on multiple levels all at the same time.
That's right. So now we're going to kind of pivot, and Ryan's going to pull up an example, much larger example on syndication, and do this just real life IBC comparison, and just again a much larger example, and then we're going to kind of round it off. If you have any questions, drop them in the chat again, and we'll spend time for Q&A at the end if you're still here with us, and we will certainly reach out to everybody afterward and give you an opportunity to schedule time with us to talk. No strings attached. Again, it's just an opportunity to chat more, fill in the blanks. We can set up a time to see what it would look like for you. Everybody's situation is different. Everybody's situation is so unique. There is no one size fits all approach. And so it really is very customizable to you and your situation. So we'll talk. All right, Ryan, it's yours.
All right. I know we've gone through a lot of numbers and spreadsheets, and I don't want to belabor the point, so I'm not going to take too long on this. But this was just kind of, again, we kind of structured this. We did some earlier presentations for general partner real estate syndicators raising capital, the ones actually doing the deals. This one's particularly geared towards limited partners or LPs in real estate syndication deals. Although, as we've shown, it could be any number of things that you could apply this concept towards. But in this case, this is a real life client example, a case study with a client of mine who is also a real estate syndicator, passive investor, LP, etc. And here's the first, just the variables was he was going to invest. His plan was to invest $200,000 a year into multifamily commercial real estate syndications. He's in the 40% overall tax bracket. Assumed rate of return, or the assumed long-term capital gains rate on the property was 15%. Assuming at the time this was when rates were really low, 3.5% loan interest rate. He's getting a preferred return of 8% as part of the syndication deal. He's getting 100% of his return of principal, return of capital in year 3 through a cash out refi, which I'll go into in a second. We're assuming he's getting 50% additionally of a capital event when the property's sold. He's not paying any taxes on any of the return of capital or the preferred return. And he's got over $200,000 of household free cash flow and $600,000 in the bank. So those are kind of the starting parameters. And he's like, hey, look, Ryan, I'm already doing this. I'm convinced of this strategy. Show me why it makes more sense to run this through a policy than to just do it the way I have been through a checking account. Right. And so again, this was this is kind of the bottom line of the actual fund profile. Year 0, or the initial outlay of $200,000. First year preferred return of 16%, or 16,000, which is 8%. Same thing second year. Third year, he's assuming we're getting 100% return of capital through a cash out refi at the property level that the syndicator does, which is another really cool thing. It's like infinite banking with properties at a syndication level. He's getting all that money back tax free. He's getting, again, preferred return of 8% or 16,000 in year 4. And then they sell at year 5 for, between the bonus interest and the preferred return, $85,000. So pretty tidy net IRR of over 18% in here, which, again, if you know what syndication investments are like, if you got a good sponsor operator who knows what they're doing, then that's not at all unreasonable. In fact, in one syndication, he actually earned 25%. Unfortunately, some other ones didn't go as well. So you got to be careful in doing the deals, doing your due diligence on the syndicators, how they're structuring, particularly the debt in a lot of cases, which is causing issues these days. But this is a fairly bread and butter commercial multifamily real estate syndication example from the LP's perspective. So that's all this going in assumptions. Now, there's a lot of things behind the scenes that I'm not showing here, but just boiling it down to his total liquidity. Remember, he had $600,000 in the bank. He's deploying $200,000 a year into these syndication deals for 10 years and then just reinvesting the returns and letting them continue to compound. And on the left side of the screen, you see the non-IBC in orange. That's if he just funded the deal out of his checking account. He would have $612,000 at the end of year 1 using the IBC strategy, running the money through the policy, because, again, you are going to be slightly behind those first several years, which is why we constantly, emphasize the fact this is a long-term play. He's going to have slightly less. He'd only have $550,000 or so. So he's about $60,000 less liquidity than he would have had at the end of year 1. But he's got enough liquidity where this is not going to be a problem for him. And you see that gap narrowing as time goes on, as the policy cash value continues to grow. By the end of year 8, he's ahead of the game. In this case, he was planning on retiring in year 10. He was going to be about $177,000 better off with IBC. This is the IBC advantage we're looking at here. And you can see those numbers, continue to go up. By the end of year 16, by just rerouting the flow of his money, like Jason talked about in an earlier slide, running it through the policy, he was over $1 million better off. This is not adjusting for taxes. He had total liquidity of about $7.3 million instead of $6.3 million, a little bit more. So pretty good in terms of total liquidity. Now, if we ran this out 50 years, like I showed you, exponentially better off because of the compounding over time. But I just wanted to give, a fairly reasonable, conservative example of a real life syndication investor as an LP who's doing this. And then, of course, he's also got the death benefit, which is a big deal as far as the inheritance is concerned, right? So same thing on that previous slide. He had basically no death benefit, no permanent death benefit before this. He's got significantly more now. And by the end of the 16 years, even with that 10-year drop off, when the term rider drops off and we reduce pay up the policy, he's still way better off, over $4.5 million better off, again, without adjusting for taxes, because the death benefit's tax free as well. So you add those two things up, the $1 million plus in liquidity advantage plus the $4.5 million plus in inheritance advantage over just the 16-year period, the total IBC advantage combining those two is almost $6 million. And again, that's not adjusting for taxes. And if we ran that out further decades into the future to his expected lifespan, it would be way, way more than this. But that was just one real life syndication investor's example of how using this and aggressively funding these policies and deploying them into real estate, getting that return at the same time in multiple places is really making a difference for him and his family.
Yeah, that's great. So we're gonna stop here, wind it down, and if you have questions, please go ahead and drop them in the chat. If you want to know what this can look like for you, let's get on a call and let's talk through it and let's come up with a plan. And so I'm going to drop actually in the chat here a way for you guys to schedule a meeting with us if you want to do it on your own. I'll put both calendar links for myself and Ryan, as well as the general website you can go to get more information. But I encourage you, I said it in the beginning, and because I hear it all the time, people say, I'm going to get around to it one day. I'm going to get around to it. I'm going to get around to it. I'm going to get around to it, and I say it's time. If you're saying that still, and you said it a long time ago, and you think you're going to be saying it 5 years from now, I'm going to get around to it. Now's the time. Let's talk, see what would work for you in your situation. Again, Ryan and I don't charge. We don't charge for the strategy planning and the education. We want to get something implemented for you that's right for you in your situation. Only money out of pocket you'd ever run into in this case is whatever you put into premiums. Okay. So don't feel like we're going to hook you into something that you don't want to get into. You want this to work. We want to set something up good for you that's going to last your whole life. And when you get it, you're going to be telling your friends, oh my gosh, you guys, you got to check this out. So start with the book on the next slide. Let's start with the book. Pick up a copy. If you want to go to the Nelson Nash Institute infinitebanking.org site, you can pick up a copy. You go to our website, 1024wealth.com, and pick up the book /shop. If you want to pick up a book, for me, this is for the printed copy. Hit discount code on Unbridled on the website, and you get a few bucks off there. We'll drop ship it to you, and you'll get it that way. Otherwise, they have the audio version online. You can pick that up, but I don't usually recommend that because there's a lot of numbers still. Kindle on there is great. Do that too. Reach out to us. I put our information in the chat. Again, if you have questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat as well. But 1024wealth.com/NREIA. And and the reason we put that URL, by the way, we didn't really talk about it, is I have this exclusive agreement with National RIA. I am their guy for all things infinite banking and life insurance. So we have the privilege of partnering with National RIA and being their trusted resource for infinite banking. And this kind of trickles down to the different RIAs around the country. And you'll find me speaking at different RIAs all over the place. And I love it. Definitely hit me up sometime if I end up at your RIA, and let's continue talking. But here's my information there. There's Ryan's information as well. You can scan the QR code on the screen. Anything you want to add, Ryan?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you are interested in this, but you're not ready for a policy, maybe you already have a policy, or if you just want straight financial planning or investment advice, then I can provide that as well. That's a separate thing from what I do with Jason at Unbridled Wealth, but I am separately licensed as a certified financial planner and investment advisor with a registered investment advisory firm. So whether you want to start with the policy and then go into the strategy and planning from there, or start with the strategy and planning on the front end and then get into the policy from there, I can do that either way, and I'm happy to do that. And if you need help, or maybe you want to do all of it at the same time, then that's great too. Jason and anybody really at Unbridled Wealth, we do a really good job of strategy and planning, but it's sometimes I find people that just want more of like a straight, fee-based planning approach, almost like a consulting project on the front end before they decide they get into this. So that's something I can do any number of ways if you work with me, whether it's as a financial planning client and or as an insurance client. But either way, reach out to us. Jason and I can help you with anything. That Calendly link, mine is in the top there, and Jason's is below that, or you can take a picture of that. You can reach out to us, give us a phone call, any number of ways. The thing that I would just re-emphasize that Jason has said over and over is make this day one, get around to it, reach out, at least schedule a meeting, and we can talk from there, because everything we've shared is assuming generic examples, and they're good for making the point. But at the end of the day, it really has to be custom tailored to your specific personal and household or business needs and investment objectives. So that's really, really important. And the best thing you can do is just reach out to us and we can have a conversation.
Yep. So pop in the chat if you got any questions. We got just a couple more minutes and we'll wrap it up for you guys. Any questions? Ryan, I'll kick this over to you. How old do I have to be to get started, or am I too old to get started?
Great question. Well, as they say, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is today, right? So I find that people across the spectrum, for financial planning and for IBC and these insurance policies, there are so many different ways. If you're old and cost of insurance would be a problem, or you're uninsurable, then you can use, family members, business partners, anybody with whom you have what's called an insurable interest. There's ways to get around that. I've set that up, a policy for my parents using my sister as the insured. It's working beautifully. There's many ways to skin that cat, so to speak. Generally, obviously, the younger you are, the better you are. I gave the example. I started off at the ripe young age of 24 with $200 a month, and it made a massive difference later in life. So it's never too young, never too early or too late to get started, but make today the day that you reach out and take some action.
Yep. Yeah, I love that plant a tree example, because I hear people say, hey, it's too late to get started. And that's the next thing out of my mouth is like, yeah. Because people say every single week I've talked to people and they go, hey, I wish I would have started this 20 years ago. Literally, every week I hear it. I wish I would have started this 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Me too, Ryan too, we all wish we would have started it earlier. Yep. But second best time to plant a tree is today. And
don't make that mistake with your kids. If you've got kids, I've got some clients who are doing juvenile policies that are really, really powerful, getting them started. I mean, if you think it's amazing starting at the age of 24, what if you started when you were 6 months old, right? I mean, the power of compounding, we're usually thinking a 50-year time frame for somebody in their 30s or 40s is pretty insane. You see some of these juvenile policies with these kids. I mean, they're multi-millionaires just based on the cash value in their policy by age 40 or 50 if they start really, really young. So, I mean, there's any number of ways to do that. There's estate planning benefits. I love the juvenile policies for teaching your kids, funding the policies for them, teaching them how to use it, becoming stewards of wealth. And then, so it's basically like, instead of just giving them fruit from the tree, give them the entire tree and teach them how to cultivate and tend it.
Yeah, that's right. So there's no minimum to get started. There's no maximum to get, the thing, again, and we've said it before, it's catered to you and your situation. So we'll find a number that works for you, that makes sense for you. We will never walk into a conversation with a dollar amount in mind, because that's, one, not appropriate. Two, it needs to work for you. You don't want to be insurance poor, as I say. You don't want to be stressed about writing that insurance check every month, and see how that works. So I've got clients doing a couple $100 a month. I've got clients doing several $100,000 a year, and everything in between.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So we'll find out what works for you and your situation. All right. I got your slideshow on the screen here. And anyway, on the screen, there's our contact information one last time. And we're going to wrap this up for you guys. And thanks for attending. Again, reach out to us with any questions. I would love to talk through even more circumstances. How does this work for supplementing retirement or being my retirement? How does this work for intergenerational wealth? We didn't have time to get into all of that tonight. We could go for another hour on those topics, And so reach out, let's talk, and let's get your head wrapped around it. Grab a copy of that book, and the more you learn, the more you understand it, the more you'll want to use it. And then the more you use it, the more you understand it also.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah, I couldn't have said it
great.
better myself. Thanks for spending your evening with us. We appreciate your time and your attention. And like Jason said, it's never too early or too late to start. So we look forward to hopefully touching base and getting to know you and your situation fairly soon.
All right. Thanks, guys.